This content is brought to you by iTrust Capital, which is a great platform that allows you to easily invest in crypto without worrying about taxes or fees. iTrust Capital allows you to invest in crypto through an individual retirement account or IRA. IRAs are tax sheltered accounts, which means all of your crypto is tax-free and can even grow tax-free over time. The process of signing up with iTrust Capital is very easy. They have a mobile app. They have 25 plus cryptocurrencies. They have full support, a dedicated team ready to help you. And it is free. And once again, 100% free to sign up with iTrust Capital. There are no hidden fees and there's no monthly subscription or membership. They also have great security. They utilize Coinbase custody for all their custodial services. So you don't have to worry. It is institutional grade crypto custody that they are using. This is a great platform. Once again, it is free to sign up. So visit the link in the description and go check it out. If you sign up with my link, you get a $100 funding bonus. So once again, check the link in the description. Welcome back to the Thinking Crypto podcast, your home for cryptocurrency news and interviews. With me today is a very distinguished guest, and that is former SEC Commissioner Joseph Grundfest. Joseph is also a professor at Stanford Law School and director and chair of the Audit Committee at KKR Co. Joseph, it's an honor to have you on the show.
It's very kind, but I'd really appreciate it, Tony, if you just call me Joe. Joseph is far too formal and familiar and makes me feel older than I actually am. It's hard to do, by the way.
Joe, it is. Joe, let's start with your background. Where are you from and where did you grow up?
New York City, 155th Street and Broadway, from the Heights, all right, which is, the star of the new Lin-Manuel.
For sure. Well,
Broadway and the like. Absolutely.
I'm a New Yorker myself.
Yeah. Really? From where?
So I grew up in Queens. My wife is from Brooklyn, and we ended up in New Jersey.
So it's a mixed marriage, Queens and Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Right. Very, very intriguing. Where in Queens?
Richmond Hill, and then I moved out my parents' place and lived in Forest Hills.
Oh, okay. So we originally lived in Washington Heights, and then when I was 10, we moved to Rego Park, which is right next to Forest Hills. So now we're going to play Queens geography. Where in Forest Hills?
Near Austin Street. Before
the other side of Queens Boulevard.
Yeah.
You see, I lived on the north side of Queens Boulevard, and you lived on the south side of Queens Boulevard.
Yeah.
I got your number. I know where you're from. I know all about you, Tony.
Yeah, New York has a special place in my heart, even though I'm in Jersey now. I went to high school in this city, and things are starting to come back to life, but we still got ways to go.
So where did you go to high school?
Fiorello LaGuardia,
okay.
School of Performing Arts for drawing. I was a bit artistic in my younger days.
Fantastic.
How did you end up becoming a commissioner in the SEC? And I guess the question before that is, what did you want to be when you were growing up?
What did I want to be when I was growing up? Oh, there's no doubt about that. You know the guy that drives the subway train and sits right up front? I wanted his job. You're laughing. It's entirely true. When I was a kid, the greatest thing in life was going to the front of the damn subway train, putting my nose up against the mirror or the window, all right, and just sort of watching everything go by. And I thought the greatest job in life would be driving one of these subway trains. And it may still be true. Who the hell knows?
For sure. I mean, especially in a city like New York, where massive tunnel infrastructure, even above ground train systems as well.
Well, you see, I had a favorite moment, and that's when you're on the number 1 train headed north. And in Upper Manhattan, you come out from the subway and you go above ground. All right. And it then becomes an L line. And that magic moment when you go out from underground and all of a sudden there's sunlight and you're above everything. When I was a kid, I loved that. Just absolutely loved it.
It's pretty amazing. Even when I was going to school and I took about 4 trains to get to my school from Queens, it is one of the things I would go to the front of the cart as well and just look out and see how things are going in the tunnel and then going above ground. Yeah. It's pretty awesome.
So I know that commute because I used to, when we lived out in Rego Park, I would take the double G and then I would switch to the L, all right, and then go from Brooklyn to Manhattan because I went to Stuyvesant, All right. So I simply just had to do the two trains and the one switch.
Wow. So how did
we
you
can spend this whole, we don't have to talk about crypto. We can just New York subways. We do an hour on that. We'll both be happy. And if the audience is disappointed, who cares about them? We're from New York. It's not about them. It's about us.
We'll have to schedule a part 2 to talk about New York.
All right. Deal, Tony. Deal.
So how did you end up becoming a commissioner of the SEC?
Well, that's quite a story. I'll try to give you the short version. Most people don't recognize, but by statute, the Securities and Exchange Commission can't have more than 3 members who are of the same political party as the president. So if there's a Republican president, you can only have 3 Republicans. So back in the early 1980s, not only did I become a commissioner of the SEC, at the time that I was nominated, I was the 2nd youngest commissioner in the history of the SEC. I was still paying off my student loans.
Wow.
The only younger commissioner at the time was William O. Douglas, who then went on to the Supreme Court. So obviously I'm a loser over here. So what happened was I'm a registered Democrat. I always have been. Ronald Reagan was then president. There was a huge problem in the savings and loan industry, and people needed to clean it up. And there were all sorts of issues relating to mergers and acquisitions, hostile takeovers and the like. And the Republican administration needed to have a rational strategy. So, I was trained as a lawyer and as an economist. And basically, I'm a centrist Democrat, right? But on social policy issues, there's no doubt. I lean towards liberal. Okay, but I'm economically rational, unlike some other Democrats. That's a different conversation. So I wind up in conversations with the White House, and they want to bring me on board. All right, and they say, well, Grundfest, you're so reasonable on this economic stuff. You know exactly what to do. Why are you a registered Democrat? And I said, that's because I disagree with you on these social policy issues. And they go, what do you mean by that? I kind of go like, we got this thing called AIDS, and I think what you're doing with AIDS is terrible. We've got all of these issues around, gender and women's rights. I disagree with you fundamentally about that. We have issues about race in America. There's another area where you and I we're not seeing eye to eye. And the joke is that working with White House personnel, I was the first person to develop Don't Ask, Don't Tell. That I would join the administration, I'd work with them on economic policy issues, but they wouldn't ask me about social policy and about AIDS, and I wouldn't tell them why they were getting it all wrong, just all absolutely wrong. And that was the joke, but they would always come to me and they'd say, hey, Grundfest, we're getting a lot of flack because of our position on AIDS. And I thought, well, of course you are, because you're wrong. All right. And I'd explain it to them. I just wouldn't go to the press. I'm not a leaker. And then there was a vacancy on the SEC, and they needed to find a Democrat. And they said, where are we going to find an economically rational Democrat? Oh, and by the way, remember that at the time when we were dealing with the S&L crisis, people actually went to jail. And I knew how to get people to go to jail, all right, for financial frauds and the like. And we had a pretty reasonable and good policy with regard to securities markets and the like. And I think people on both sides of the aisle would agree. So they said, look, where are we going to find a Democrat? And he said, we got this crazy guy, but he's only like 33 years old. Maybe we put him on the SEC. And that's the irony. I remained true to my principles. I was a Democrat working in a Republican administration. We worked very well together on economic policy issues. We were brutally at odds with each other on social policy issues, but we managed to make it work.
I wish there were more folks of your caliber, around now where we can work better together, even though we have our differences.
Oh, it's not, look, it was a different time. I can't take personal credit for it. When I was on the commission, we had 5 people and we all had different views, and we would sit down and we'd say, okay, how are we going to come together on this? All right, that was the ethos. We would sit down, we'd say, look, we can all disagree and we get nowhere, Or we can all say, look, what makes sense? I got to give up on something. You got to give up on something. Can we come up with something where all of us get 75% of what we want? And yeah, it's doable, it's possible. But in today's world, unfortunately, if you get 75% of what you want, it's a huge victory. People are going to rake you over the coals for the 25% you didn't get. And they're going to complain that you gave away the store. And the political, there's the old phrase, the perfect is the enemy of the good. Well, now we're in a situation where the politically extreme is the enemy of the socially rational. It's a terrible, terrible dynamic. Yeah. Bad for everybody.
Do you think, and we're going to talk about crypto and blockchain technology, it's a result of technology where we're able to dissect and see things in real time and also go and review it 1,000 times and get down to the minuscule detail?
Well, Tony, it's more than that. It's more than that. Let's assume that there are crazy people on the left and that there are crazy people on the right.
Yeah.
Okay. And we got a population, I'm just going to round the numbers, say population United States, 340 million. Okay. And let's assume that 1% of our population is crazy on the left and 1% is crazy on the right. That's 3.4 million crazy right-wing nuts and 3.4 million crazy left-wing nuts. Now, without the internet, these 3.4 million nuts on the left and on the right would likely never find each other.
Sure.
It would be dispersed and relatively disorganized in society.
Yeah.
Now, along comes this wonderful thing called the internet. And one of the side effects of the internet is it makes it easy for the nuts to find each other.
Yeah.
All right. And at this point, you now have an organized mass of 3.4 million crazy people on the left and crazy people on the right. And 3.4 million people are hard to ignore, even though they're only 1% of the total population. So one of the problems with this wonderful technology we have is that it amplifies what I call the fruitcake factor in society. These fruitcakes have always been with us, but their voices are now amplified in such a way that it makes life much more difficult for people in the center. And also, these fruitcakes are much more influential in the primary process when it comes to voting because they're more dedicated to particular results. They're more likely to vote in the primaries, and therefore it drives the Republican Party to the right and the Democratic Party to the left. As you can see, as a New Yorker, I am an equal opportunity insulter.
Well, I'm along the same lines as an independent. I don't tag along with any one party. I look for what makes sense, what's reasonable, and it could be a Republican or a Democrat, because like you said, there's a lot of extremism on both sides, and those folks' voices seem to be amplified even more than before.
Terrible. Yes. It's terrible.
So with that technology, it has its good, but it comes with some bad. Now on top of the internet, there's a layer 2 of blockchain, and on blockchain are cryptocurrencies. What are your thoughts on the technology and its impact on what's happening now and as well as the future?
Well, I tell you, I am a big fan of what I describe as compliant crypto. We're going through what I would describe as a Wild West phase in crypto, that in many ways is potentially quite dangerous, and in many ways is perfectly understandable as early phase of the evolution of a very, very novel form of technology that is potentially socially transformative. And many of the issues that we see around crypto, I think, are going to be amplified by concerns about what happens in the Ukraine, as we're having this conversation now, Russia has recently invaded the Ukraine, sanctions are being imposed, and questions are being raised about the extent to which it's possible to evade these sanctions through the use of crypto. And when people ask me, gee, can crypto be used to evade the sanctions? The answer, well, of course it can.
Right.
And some aspects of crypto were actually built precisely to help people avoid, the sanctions and help people evade. And that sort of raises the conundrum around what are we going to do with crypto? And it explains my interest in what I call compliant crypto. And again, go back to my story about the SEC used to get 75. If you are a dyed-in-the-wool libertarian, and if you think that crypto can be used to evade government authorities around the world and create a separate space on the internet, you're going to disagree with everything I have to say. That's fine. That's okay. Because I do think there's a way to evolve crypto so that socially harmful effects, for example, crypto is great for buying and selling drugs. I'm not a big fan of that. Crypto's great for illegal arms sales. You're not going to get me on board with that. Crypto, ransomware would not exist if we didn't have crypto. I am not a big fan of ransomware. Shutting down hospitals, putting people's in lives so that a bunch of people can wind up stealing money from other people. No, that is not my business model. I am not interested in promoting anything that makes anything like that easier. But creating alternatives to fiat currency, okay, I can get behind a piece of that. I understand the social demand for that. If you're in Russia and all of a sudden the value of the ruble has declined by 50%, which means that all imports into Russia are now today twice as expensive in rubles as they were a month ago. That's the reality of the Russian consumer. And he says, if I would have gotten out of the ruble and if I would have been in something else, but something else that is compliant, I would have avoided that. I get that. And then I think the challenge for society is, how do we structure something that achieves many, but not all, of the benefits that people see for crypto, while avoiding many of the terrible downsides that we have to admit also exist. There's a tremendous amount of, forgive me, crap that's going on in the crypto market, including fraud and rug pulls and all this other nonsense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think folks would not be honest if they said there's not illegal activities happening with crypto. Now, as with human beings, the bad actors will use any technology, new technology, to achieve their bad habits or whatever it may be. And, you talked about the sanctions. I want to clarify, of course, they can use crypto to avoid sanctions, but you're not saying that crypto is the main catalyst there. But historically, before crypto, they could have tried to use other things to avoid sanctions, right?
Of course. So, yeah, but potentially the evolution of certain forms of crypto make avoiding the sanctions easier.
Sure.
All right, than other techniques. And there are legitimate questions about the extent to which crypto can be used at scale, because at some point you need to or want to convert from crypto to fiat currency or to hard goods. All right, like, how do you buy a mega yacht with Bitcoin? That's hard to do. Okay, so there are scale effects. All right, but the question is a very important one to ask and answer.
Now, the crypto asset class, this new technology, it's new to all of us, even folks in the government side of things, regulators and so forth, and the folks at the SEC. Certainly, they have a job to do to protect retail investors from fraud. And there's been scams. I've seen some of them, but we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. There are many people who believe the SEC is not doing a great job as is right now under Gary Gensler. What are your thoughts on how the SEC is handling this and what could they be doing better?
Well, let's begin with sympathy for the SEC.
Hmm.
The SEC is charged with enforcing laws that were written in the 1930s. Tony, how many members of Congress were thinking about Bitcoin in 1933 or 1934 when they wrote the federal securities laws? Give me the name of every member of Congress who said, this is how we're going to handle Bitcoin under the federal securities laws. See? Nobody thought about this. So what we have is a regulatory regime that is designed not to be able to deal with this problem. And then we tell the SEC, you got to deal with this problem. Right? Why? Because, well, there's a perfectly reasonable interpretation of the federal securities laws that says a piece of what's going on in crypto is a security and should be regulated by the SEC. There's no doubt about that. But the question is, which piece? And how do you regulate it? And how do you wind up regulating it without killing it? Which goes back to my point about compliant crypto. All right. To take a step back and say, well, the problem is all the SECs, that's not fair. That's not right. Okay. And by the same token, to take a step back and say, well, the SEC has been handling this perfectly. That's not fair, and that's not right either. I think the more appropriate approach is to stand back and say, you know, this situation is a mess. Congress never planned for it. And now we've given the SEC and other agencies, it's not just the SEC, it's a problem for the CFTC, the banking regulators. It's a problem for the whole regulatory structure. We don't have statutes that are designed to address the challenges presented by crypto. And we're asking all of our regulatory agencies to deal with that challenge without giving them the appropriate congressional level instructions and tools. So why are we surprised the situation's a mess? Of course it's a mess.
I agree with you there that, and I've heard Chair Gensler talk about this, and I give him credit for that he said it even before members of Congress, that these are the rules and regulations I'm operating with. It is what it is. But I think folks are a bit taken back with how heavy-handed he's coming down on this, given that he understands the dynamic. He was teaching about crypto at MIT. And, obviously we're not in his head and we don't know what he's thinking. But I think folks are just taken back. Wow, this is aggressive. Even Chair Gensler, Chair Clayton was not this aggressive. So what's going on here? Are there other motives? And there's been.
Well, what's really interesting over here. I can tell the story that it's being really aggressive, and I can tell the story that it's being unbelievably passive. Which story you want to hear first?
I guess a passive. I'm curious what your perspective.
So here's the passive story. How many coins are out there, Tony?
Oh boy, there's thousands.
How many of them has the SEC shut down?
To my knowledge, it's as far as when you say shut down or sue them or
sued them, gone after them. How many have they gone after? Forget about shut down. How many have they gone after?
It's probably near 20, maybe, and I could be
if that. All right, if that. Okay. All right. So as you said, there are thousands out there, and they've gone after less than 1%. Is that aggressive or is that passive? Is he talking a bigger game than he's actually doing? Whoa. What's going on here? See my point? Now, let me argue the other side of the coin.
Sure.
Okay. What the hell are they doing? They're making all of these noises, all right, in terms of suing Coinbase as an exchange. They're going after, XRP on, a variety of strategies that many people feel make absolutely no sense. They're trying to, prevent people from coming forward with technologies that potentially are very socially valuable. They're imposing regulatory costs that shouldn't exist. and just really making life unnecessarily difficult for a potential new technology that could have great advantages for everybody. I told you two stories, and I'm not even going to make you pick. You know why? Because both are simultaneously true. I mean, have I said anything that's false?
No.
Aha. Have I given you two very different pictures of the same thing?
Yeah.
What are we going to do with that?
So with that said, is the answer that we need to pressure the folks in Congress, our representatives, to put out a new Howey test to or a version 2.0 or a different regulatory rules or whatever it may be to regulate crypto?
Yeah, I think what we need is a very high level set of guidance that says, look, here's who's got the authority. Here's what the authority is. And as a practical matter, we're going to have to delegate down to either the existing regulators or a new regulatory mechanism, or we're going to consolidate this in this, regulatory. There are 20 different ways to solve the problem. Mm-hmm. Every single one of these 20 solutions stinks. All right? There's no good solution here. We're just going to have to pick the least bad solution. And again, they're all going to involve various levels of compromise. Yeah, look, if you start looking for perfect solutions to complicated problems, you're going to go through life very, very disappointed. All right? Sure. Getting to a point where you say, that's good enough. I can make that work. All right. The shoe doesn't fit perfectly, but I can walk in it. Unfortunately, that's where we are in the world these days. All right. It's let's come up with something workable, if imperfect. We'll hold hands and we'll move forward together. That's why I think what compliant crypto is going to have to be.
Sure. I think to your point, I think we had to crawl and then walk and run. There'll probably be multiple iterations to regulations. What are your thoughts on Commissioner Hester Peirce, safe harbor proposal? Is that something that you think could be adopted?
I think, look, on this one, I think her heart is certainly in the right place. And I think there are different ways to do different forms of safe harbors. But the precise form that she's proposed, I think, is a great, great place to start a conversation. It's not necessarily where I would wind up at the end of the conversation, but it's a great starting point. And I think that's the way that she thinks about it and proposes it.
If you don't mind me asking, do you have something in mind that you think could work? And it's okay if not. Because that might be a whole other podcast by itself.
Oh, no. It's look, let's get the conversation going. So I'm not wedded to what I'm about to say, and think about it as directional. Where might we think about a regulatory structure? Well, if you stop and if you study the SEC regulations carefully, what's intriguing is there's a piece of them that I think we can make work at a certain level in the crypto space. And there's another piece that don't work at all and we need to rethink entirely. So the piece that we can wind up making work, believe it or not, is the disclosure piece. Clearly, you can't do it with traditional SEC disclosure documents where you go through the complicated S1 registration process and it costs you $20 million to get through the SEC. No. But it is possible to come up with a simplified form of disclosures that would work relatively cheaply, all right, for crypto products. And in fact, you can program many of the crypto products automatically to give rise to real-time disclosures that could be compliant with SEC rules and regulations. Crypto, in and of itself, can wind up being a solution to part of the problems about disclosure for crypto. This can be done. So if we start and we say, wait a minute, a large part of SEC regulation is around disclosure. I think those are the easier problems to address. Okay. Then we have this very complicated set of aftermarket trading rules that you have to trade through a broker, that you have to have a broker account. There are all sorts of custody and other complicated rules. For some forms of crypto, you can make that work if you try really hard and if you amend the existing rules in a variety of ways. It takes significant amendment. For other forms of crypto, this will never work. All right? Where, you know, for example, I'll use the example of Filecoin, all right, where people want to get rewarded for letting people use storage on their computers. Well, if in order to do that, you have to have a brokerage account with the SEC, that'll never work. So we need something different. Can you write Filecoin so that all of the disclosures that you need in order to transact in Filecoin are out there and you're fully informed? Yes, you can code Filecoin to do that. We can do that. But if you require that something with that form of utility only trade through the securities processing and settlement system, then you kill Filecoin. So we need something different in terms of the secondary trading. Then the third piece of it is anti-fraud. The amount of jokers and hucksters and pure fraudsters in this market, epic, right? Tremendous amount of fraud going on here, all right? And anybody who says, no, it's not happening, there are no rug pulls, you know, Tether, okay, I mean, come on, give me a break, all right? So what we need is a mechanism where we can get the disclosure. I think that's doable. Secondary trading regulation, you'd have to amend the existing rules. It'll work for some, but not all forms of crypto, and they need something else that allows that other form of crypto to exist. And then you need cops on the beat, all right? And there, the challenge is going to be the level of anonymity you're going to allow, because if you allow pervasive anonymity, real strong anonymity, then you're going to be able to have all sorts of scams and you're never able to punish anybody. And I don't think that's good for the world. That's not consistent with my view of compliant crypto. There you go. I've solved all the world's problems. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.
So if you don't mind me asking, are you currently consulting with the folks at the SEC right now on these things at all?
No.
Mm-hmm.
No.
Is it kind of they haven't asked, or you haven't offered, or anything along those lines?
They haven't asked, I haven't offered, and I don't think the political environment is currently conducive to, I don't know, along the lines that I just described. I agree and that go back to we'd rather fight than solve the problem. The SEC is pushing in a direction that leads to selective forms of conflict. Notice what I said. They're litigating a small number of cases, and they're letting a million things go.
Yeah.
And much of the stuff they're letting go is much worse than the stuff they're deciding to litigate.
So on that note, we have this lawsuit against Ripple. And I'm an XRP holder, in full disclosure. And I was affected by this lawsuit. And I'm very angry about it as well, and so are many other folks, because we see a lot of things with former Chair Clayton, and as well as Bill Hinman, a lot of speeches, a lot of connections with folks involved in Ethereum and Bitcoin. And the way this lawsuit was handled, it just seems to be some level of impropriety. And obviously, I don't want to make accusations because we don't have full proof. And I know you also sent a letter to Chair Clayton about this lawsuit to file it because of the optics and how things would look. What's your take on this whole situation?
So number one, I just want to be clear. No suggestion of impropriety that I have against anybody at all.
Sure.
Zero. right? I couldn't be more emphatic about that. Zero. My question is judgment, right? And judgment is different than impropriety. And, it's hardly a secret. I had questions about the judgment involved in bringing the lawsuit against XRP. I had questions about the timing. I had questions about the implications. I had questions about policy. Is this a matter that's really best addressed from a social perspective by bringing a lawsuit, or is it better addressed by saying, let's look at our regulations? It should be clear to me. Look, the issue for me is let's get a system that works and that generates compliant crypto. And this lawsuit, it's a high probability that no matter who wins, actually gets us farther away from a good solution.
Sure.
Because if the SEC wins, then we've got a crazy regime where we're going to try to fit, square pegs into round holes. That's not good for the peg. It's not good for the hole, and it's not good for the person trying to make an unnatural act happen. And if XRP wins, then arguably one of the very few cops we have on the beat winds up being weakened in a way that ideally you don't have them weakened. So, from a social perspective, you can say, look, no matter how this turns out, we're going to be losers. And then there's the separate question about the merits litigation and 1,000,001 other things. But if you really care about making the world a better place, all right, and if you want to get back to my theme about compliant crypto, does this litigation really help us achieve any of these results? Let's put it this way. I'm not persuaded.
And this may be a question you may not be able to answer, but I have to ask, how do you see this case wrapping up? And you mentioned some of the potential impact that it's not going to be good for both parties, the crypto industry as well as the SEC.
So I think there are many ways that it can wrap up. And, what's interesting is a lot of the public discourse is around the question of whether XRP is a security or not. There are other issues here that I think are intellectually maybe even more intriguing and may even be more outcome determinative. Let me give you an example. There's a Supreme Court opinion called Morrison, and it basically says that the federal securities laws are designed to apply to transactions that occur in the United States. And there's a strong judicial presumption against the extraterritorial application of US law. And the lower courts have a variety of different doctrines to try to figure out when a transaction actually occurs in the United States. So one rule of thumb is, does the transaction close in the United States? Well, here's what's interesting. If you wind up transacting in XRP on a foreign exchange, that's not in the United States. So to the extent that XRP transactions are occurring elsewhere, right, in a foreign exchange, whether it's a security or not doesn't make a difference. The SEC can't reach it.
Right.
Now, more intriguing. What does it mean to confirm a transaction on a blockchain the way XRP is structured, which is a consensus mechanism, and it's an 80% consensus mechanism? Well, what does that mean? Suppose the node that gets you across 80% is located in Iceland. Well, does that transaction occur in the United States? Suppose that all of the nodes, right, that confirm the transaction are outside the United States. Suppose that, 50% of the node, we don't know. And then here's a separate question. And here, I just don't know how the coding is it possible to look at the history of that blockchain and try to figure out where it was confirmed, who confirmed it, and who the confirming nodes were. I have to go back and look at that. The burden of proof is on the plaintiff. And if you can't determine where this happened, how do you establish where the transaction actually closed? So it may be that even if you decide that this is a security, and that's going to be hotly litigated, the SEC may not be able to reach transactions unless it can prove that they occurred in the United States. And given the architecture of the system, it may not be able to do that.
Right.
So by the way, so if that's right, the SEC in a certain sense can win the battle and lose the war.
You brought up some great points, and I've been talking about it recently. Decentralized network that is global, with assets that are moving through the pipeline of that network globally. How can the United States, the SEC, given that the other parts of the world, XRP is considered a virtual currency, but only the United States does the SEC say it's a security? And what seems to be a bit, I don't know if the word is intellectually dishonest, how can XRP today be a security given that network structure? Maybe in 2013 to 2015 it was. Maybe Ripple has to pay a fine for that. But how can you say XRP today is a security?
Look, these are all extraordinarily interesting questions. And as you properly point out, situations evolve over time. And as Bill Hinman in his speech said, look, at one point, Ether may have been a security. All right. And then he said, at the time of the speech, but now it's not. So all of this is, as we say, state contingent, historically contingent, phase contingent. It may be that something's a security at one point, and then it evolves and it's not a security, and then it's a security again.
Why do you think, and this is a very hard question to answer because obviously we're not in people's heads, but why do you think the SEC and specifically former Chair Clayton waited 8 years, or the SEC as a whole waited 8 years to do this? And why do you think it was handled the way it was on his last days out?
Tony, you gave my answer. It's hard to get into other people's heads. Or would I have approached the situation differently? Yes. That doesn't mean I'm right. It just means that I would have done it differently.
I want to get your thoughts on, and we talked a bit about this, the decentralized nature of the internet. And we're moving to a world that's very decentralized and tokenized. And with that, you now have the individual XRP holders coming together, going back to our initial talk about the internet, coming together, and they're on social media. And this seems to be a PR nightmare for the SEC. And they're also being represented by attorney John Deaton. What are your thoughts on what's happening? And we see this in other aspects as well with AMC and meme stocks, as they would call it. What are your thoughts on this?
My thoughts are, look, if people have a legitimate gripe, they've got the right to petition the government. All right. If they can put together the equivalent of, a group or a class or a trade association that wants to express their views as part of the litigation, bring it on. Absolutely. Especially in our society, I would disfavor any approach that tries to shut people down. All right. If people, and this is about anything. All right. If people feel aggrieved, all right, by, treatment of XRP or by social policies or what have you, voice your grievances. That's one of the things that historically has made America great. Please do it respectfully.
Yeah.
Please do it intelligently. Not sure we ever had that, but, if we could have a little bit more respectful discourse rather than people just yelling at each other, it'd be a better place.
Sure. And I think, what's interesting, and it's not just specifically with the SEC or this case, but you see it within the crypto community because of the financial incentives. There's very much a lot of tribalism and a lot of throwing stones. And it's because money is involved.
Yeah.
It's so interesting, that dynamic and human.
And the other thing is not only that, money's involved, but people don't want to admit that money's involved. So what they do is they wrap them in the flag of different forms of principle. All right. Like I'm trying to preserve liberty, but if you scratch underneath the surface, hey, I'm going to make a couple of, dollars over here.
Where do you see this technology maybe in 5 years? I know that's a hard question to answer, but I'm just curious, if you've thought about it along, you have cryptos, digital assets, NFTs, all these things happening, CBDCs coming from central banks. Do you see a full tokenized, digitized world that we're living in, very different from today?
Well, I don't do 5-year projections. I do 4.5-year projections.
Okay.
Okay. So look, here's the trajectory where I think we're headed. I think we are headed. I'll go back and I'll say compliant crypto. I think we're headed in that direction. I think central bank digital currencies will come along. I think it'll be a very interesting set of policy issues that have to be addressed, ranging from privacy through to tax compliance and macroeconomic policy and monetary policy and all this stuff. But I do think that central bank digital currency is coming. I think that'll be very important. I think the United States is farther behind the curve than it should be. Mm-hmm. I don't think we should be the tip of the spear on that, but I think we should be intelligent and fast followers. We don't need to and shouldn't want to be the leaders in that space. I think there are many intelligent strategies we can follow there, and we should. I think the market is going to segment. There'll be a bunch of crypto players who are really interested in doing it the right way and will want to distinguish themselves from sketchier participants in the market. And we'll see that kind of a natural bifurcation. And the sketchier part of the market, which will exist, is going to become extraordinarily troublesome. Mm. It already is, and will continue to be.
I know we're running up on time. I did want to ask you about, why do you think the SEC has not approved a Bitcoin Spot ETF? They have approved a futures ETF. Is it along the lines of what you've been talking about, possibly fraud, tether, things like that?
Well, it's really interesting. Sometimes people ask me questions and say, I can't explain that. Like that's just like one of these deep mysteries of life. You've touched on one. So listen, here's the problem, I think, from the SEC's perspective. Well, the futures markets are supposed to mirror the cash market prices, right?
Yeah.
Now, if there's a manipulation, if there's a fraud, if there's something going wrong in the Bitcoin cash market, it's going to move the futures price for the Bitcoin futures, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, the SEC is allowing ETFs that are indexed to the futures price, but it's prohibiting ETFs that are indexed to the cash price. And the primary argument why it's prohibiting the ETFs indexed to the cash price is that, there could be manipulation in there, and we're not sure that this is a clean market. Let's assume that is true. It is true. Let's assume it's true. But if that is true, it has to equally be true of the futures market, where those prices are set on the same manipulated prices that you see in the cash market. And if and there's no mechanism in the futures market to filter out, to monitor, to cleanse the effect of any alleged fraud or impropriety or manipulation occurring in the cash market. So there is no, in my mind, and obviously the people at the SEC, they might be smarter than I am on this, but I just don't see how you rationally distinguish between ETFs that are indexed to cash and ETFs that are indexed to futures by saying, we're worried about manipulation, when the effect of manipulation on both markets is identical. Mm. Now, the legal phrase here under the Administrative Procedures Act is arbitrary and capricious. if a rule or a decision is arbitrary and capricious, it can't stand. Well, from my perspective, allowing ETFs indexed to futures, but prohibiting ETFs indexed to cash, it's arbitrary and capricious. You either have neither or you have both. You can't take one and not the other. All right. I mean, it's and the SEC is basically, in my view, taking the one position that, as a matter of simple logic, is totally indefensible. Why nobody has sued them on this to this point is, again, another one of these mysteries in life. But I wouldn't be surprised if they wind up getting sued sooner or later on this. And then if you ask me to predict, if you ask me to put on my Las Vegas bookie hat, over under, the SEC loses. That's an easy one.
Wow. Are you familiar with Empower Oversight? I know they've been suing the SEC with regards to a FOIA request with Bill Hinman and emails with folks at Ethereum and so forth. And so, that just came to mind because you mentioned the SEC could be sued. I was just curious if you knew about. They're a whistleblower organization. And so
never heard of them. If you want to send me stuff about it, happy to look at it.
So, quick question: who would be able to sue the SEC regarding the ETF? Would it be the industry players?
Anybody who's put in an application that's been rejected.
Wow.
Or if a bunch of organizations interested in having ETFs that trade based on the cash prices, they formed a trade association. The trade association could sue. Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow. Sure. Joseph, I know you're running out of time, so I'm going to hit the wrap-up questions and let you go.
Sure.
Do you personally own any crypto? And if so, which ones?
No.
Okay.
No, I don't own any crypto. Which ones? I don't own all of them.
How about some rapid fire questions, such as what's your favorite food?
Only if they're easy. Only if they're easy questions.
What's your favorite food?
Oh, my God. Look, before this COVID shutdown, my wife was an extraordinary chef, just really. And she's now taken this to astronomical levels. And there's so many meals that she's made that are I can't believe that I get to eat this. I'm serious. I think my favorite would be the mushroom wonton of the gods. Let me explain. What happens is you get multiple forms of mushrooms, and each wonton has a different ratio of these different mushrooms. So no two wontons are alike.
That sounds delicious.
And it is delicious. And then you have a great mushroom wonton, and you realize you will never have that wonton again. It was a one-time wonton, all right, because they're all different. And you say, like, that was my favorite one. She'll look at you and go, well, too bad, all gone. There you are. So that was an easy one. All right. Oh, and I could tell you about her pizza recipes. It's really, really remarkable. And she does things with cauliflower where anything that healthy should not taste that good. It's like a crime against nature. Total crime against nature.
Favorite musician or band?
You're catching me where I would say Keith Jarrett and the Cone concert. All right. I think there are passages in there that are just absolutely transformative, absolutely magnificent. Close second, the Beethoven Violin Concerto.
Favorite movie?
Favorite movie. Now, it would be wrong to say The Godfather. Okay? Even if that's true, it would be wrong to say The Godfather.
It's so good, though. I mean,
it is. It's extraordinarily good. But it's. All right, I'll just leave it with that. I'll just leave it with that.
Favorite book?
I will go with Henderson the Rain King by Saul Bellow. And people aren't reading that. anymore. But it's basically a story about a man who doesn't know what he wants in life. And goes off to some of the strangest places and has some of the strangest experiences, thinking that he'll find what it is that he wants in life.
I have to check that one out.
Yeah.
And finally, what do you do for pastime as a hobby?
Mushroom wonton of the gods. You think I'm kidding?
Now I'm craving wontons. I want to.
Oh, no. It's not any wonton, my friend.
Sure.
Repeat after me. Mushroom. Say after me. Mushroom wonton of the gods.
Of the gods.
There you are.
Well, I know we don't know each other that well, but maybe I'll contact you if I'm out in California, and I don't know. Maybe your wife can make it, and I'll take it to go.
Okay, that's you want the baker's dozen? We got a 12-pack. Okay. Sure. Oh, sure. You want the mustard sauce with that, or do you want the hot chili pepper sauce?
Hot chili pepper sauce.
Hot chili pepper sauce. That's okay. And then we got some of the Korean sauce on there too, which works really, really extraordinarily well, even though it's a Chinese dish. It's wonderful.
By the way, my wife is Chinese, so I am familiar with a lot of the dishes.
So we're lucky. My wife is Chinese too. So there you go. We're all set. Thank you, my friend. This was really a joy, and it was really a pleasure to be able to solve all the world's problems in less than an hour.
Joe, pleasure chatting to you. Thank you so much. And I would love to have you back on in the future.
Not a problem. I look forward to it.